This is episode 415 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Wally, we would be remiss if on this particular program, even though the Rio Grande Foundation largely stays out of the abortion debate, that we did not mention the earth-shaking 50 years in decision in Dobbs versus Jackson, which essentially kicks the abortion discussion down to the state legislatures and the governors. New Mexico has been a pro-abortion stronghold in the American Southwest, and Governor Lujan Grisham's already further entrenched that in the law with an executive order. Of course, they repealed our old law on the books, so nothing tangible is going to change. But I think the question is, was this the right decision? I think it was, because we need federalism. We need states to decide. This isn't a constitutionally protected issue. And then, how is this, more importantly, going to address the political situation here in New Mexico and potentially across the country?
Yeah, to deal with the second issue first, the one of federalism, of states' rights, everything not in the Constitution is decided by the states. You hear that about, 0.1% of the time in terms of all the political posturing and news coverage that's happened. There are certainly a few outlets that have talked about that. But from a practical and policy point of view at the states, you've seen positioning very, very much so. Pretty much every state is coming out either saying we're going to keep what we're doing, we're going to go further, or we're going to go in a different direction. And it is interesting. New Mexico, I don't know how much further you could have gone in New Mexico relative to their current law, but the governor came out basically saying that, yeah, we're going to, if anything, we're going to do more. And I don't know, from a policy point of view, was the fact that, abortion over the years had gone from basically that, 15, 16 week sort of thing up until birth now. Did that have anything to do with the Supreme Court? I couldn't say. It's one of those that certainly that wasn't their writing. They took a very legalistic approach. But yeah, abortion has been something that's certainly not been static over the years. It's been gaining in strength and in intensity from a legal point of view, and then this sets it back federally, and now it's back in the states, and each state gets to decide.
Yeah, and with Biden's poll numbers in the toilet, and Democrats in general across the country feeling the heat on a wide array of issues, COVID and economic and education, and kind of their further shift to the left on a lot of social issues. This is an issue that I think the Democratic establishment is looking to use to rally the base. Now, I found some New York Times polling relating to various Supreme Court issues. Now, it's important to note that on this and other issues, the Supreme Court does not care about polling. They are looking at the letter of the law and the Constitution, but
or not.
That's the job.
That's a job description, and whether they are or whether they aren't, the point is they don't have to get reelected. These are lifetime appointments to the Supreme Court.
True. So Ron Keddy, governor candidate, obviously he would be in charge if the Republicans manage to somehow win both houses. That's the only way you're going to see a change in restricting abortion in New Mexico. For the time being, we're going to be among the states with the most left-wing, progressive, open abortion laws in the entire country. But the New York Times had a poll that said that Americans are very evenly split on 15 weeks of pregnancy. Democrats support 73-27, independents slightly on the side of 15 weeks, 52 to 48, and then Republicans 69-31. So my assumption, broadly speaking, is that it's a basic partisan issue. If you're already a partisan Democrat, chances are you're pro-choice. If you're a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, chances are you're more conservative, you're pro-life. I guess the question, the one that we don't know about, is does this motivate the Democrat base in a way that we might not have seen? Yeah, we probably won't know the answer to that because we're also going to see a motivated Republican conservative base, presumably on the pro-life side. So I think the proof will be in the pudding come November. I don't personally see this decision suddenly saving Joe Biden's bacon or the Democrats' bacon this fall. I do think that other issues are more salient, but it's not the first time I would be wrong if I misjudge this one. So we'll see where this issue stands and how salient it is come this fall. And it is worth noting that there are neighboring states to New Mexico, including probably Texas, where it's not going to be 15 weeks. It's going to be more restrictive than that. There are a number of states that either have made it illegal already or have trigger laws on the books. And it's just going to be an interesting approach to see how states react to this decision, how quickly, how aggressively in terms of their policies.
Yes, and as you say, Paul, this is something that certainly has the potential to motivate Democrat voters to get out there. The big question is that, as you say, how will it compare to Republicans and independents along the same lines? And from the president's point of view, there's probably not a whole lot he can do in the short term that would have any impact on anything. And that's kind of the theme of the Biden administration. There are a lot of issues affecting left, right, and center, and Biden is shown to not be able to even articulate a path forward, much less implement one on a lot of things to this point. And we'll have to see if this abortion issue is any different than where we are on things like inflation and I don't know, COVID policy and all the like, where he's just basically said, there's nothing I can do.
Yeah, and really, there isn't a lot that the Supreme Court said. This is for the state legislatures and to an extent the governors of those respective states, which is, as the founding fathers intended, the state and local governments are supposed to have the bulk of the big policy-making decisions on their plate, not folks in Washington, D.C. and Congress, which are more outward-looking towards foreign policy and other interstate commerce. Now, another big Supreme Court decision this week was in the case of Carson versus Macon. Had to do with a Maine school choice, well, not a non-school choice program, I should say, a situation in Maine where, because of rural communities not having government-owned, government-operated schools, the state was funding private schools, non-religious schools. And the question to the court was, if you are a religious school, can parents take their money from the state of Maine and send their kids using those dollars to a religiously affiliated school? The liberals on the Supreme Court, I'm surprised we didn't get anything out of Sotomayor, Kagan, or Breyer, but it was a 6-3 decision. And the conservative majority said, yeah, of course, you shouldn't discriminate against these schools just because they have a religious affiliation. I think this was a no-brainer decision. Just because the First Amendment prohibits an establishment of religion doesn't mean that parents who want to take their kids to a school that's funded already by taxpayer dollars can't choose the option that they prefer. And this is done with Pell Grants and other federal higher education programs. It was just a matter of legitimizing this at the state level. And, unfortunately, before I kick it over to you, Wally, New Mexico doesn't have any real school choice programs, even with our rural communities. I would challenge the state of Maine to a rural off.
Yes.
Where do they have smaller populations in small, more isolated areas? I would put New Mexico up against Maine in a heartbeat. But this decision does kind of say, look, you can't discriminate against religious institutions in terms of those dollars.
Yeah, and Paul, this almost comes back to what's a phrase that's commonly used, where people say, "Well, we have separation of church and state," which is not what the Constitution says. As you mentioned, it says that the federal government shall not establish like a state religion. There's been in place in Great Britain, England, for example. It doesn't mean that you can't have religion associated with things. Although, again, in terms of how it's reported in the media, you wouldn't always be able to figure that out on first glance.
Yeah. Now, getting into the time machine, if you will, 10 years ago, the Obamacare decision, Sebelius versus NFIB, came down. This one salvaged Obamacare, thanks to Chief Justice Roberts, who has widely become the swing vote on the court. He's lost his swing though, with a 6-3 conservative majority. Just so happens that on this morning as well, my wife and I, we were in the hospital with our second baby, our second daughter, on the way, and turned on the TV early that morning as the court handed down its decision, and the media were reading through it. If you'll recall, Wally, they initially said the Supreme Court had overturned Obamacare, but they did not. Justice Roberts's decision was so convoluted and compromised that the media talking heads standing in front of the court couldn't actually fully understand what was going on with that decision until they had a chance to actually sit down and read it several minutes later. So first we thought we had a new baby and Obamacare overturned. As it turned out, we just had a wonderful, healthy baby, and unfortunately, Obamacare stands. It was a testament to Roberts's, kind of lack of a spine and principle. Unfortunately, that's the first thing about that decision. But it upheld this law, which has, to the extent that it's increased the amount of people covered under quote unquote health care or insurance, really just expanded Medicaid, a very poor Medicaid program that is not known to improve health outcomes through many studies, including one out of Oregon. And it increased the price of my family's health insurance program and those of millions of Americans. But I think it's safe to say that while healthcare may not be the very tippy-top issue in the United States, Obamacare just did very little, if not nothing, to improve the system overall.
Yeah, and as New Mexicans are finding out, there is a difference between having healthcare coverage and healthcare. Those are two distinct, separate things. Healthcare coverage is a card, and healthcare comes from services provided from healthcare individuals, and a lot of places, including New Mexico, is really suffering in that. The other is the purported cost controls and how it was going to make things more efficient. And that's not proven to be completely true. And, a recent issue is that an article from Politico just a few days ago, Dems weigh new plan to defuse Obamacare subsidy bomb. Mm-hmm. They're concerned that if they don't do something, basically meaning federal government subsidize things more, the plan they're on now would expose Obamacare people who are paying their own premiums as opposed to those that are on Medicaid to far higher prices right about the time people are getting ready to make up their minds about their votes in the general election. So that's something that needs to be seen as well. But Yeah, Obamacare was a very compromised. I don't know. It was. I have work with an attorney who called things like that a soup sandwich. It was, just cobbled together.
Mm-hmm.
And a decade later, there's been some good things that have happened. I'd be the first to say that. But man, and I wouldn't even call them unintended consequences because, or unforeseen consequences. But I have a feeling they were both intended and foreseen, but politically they didn't. The folks who passed it didn't care, and now we're left with a system that is probably as fragile as it was today, 10 years after Obamacare, as the day that it was passed.
Yeah, now that Supreme Court decision as well had some Federalist implications. Of course, Medicaid, I know in New Mexico today, 90% of the Medicaid program expansion under Obamacare is paid for by the federal tax dollars, i.e., new debt. But not every state eagerly accepted. And that was a decision of Susana Martinez, but not every state accepted those Medicaid dollars in that expansion. And some interesting, noteworthy states, some of the fastest growing states in the entire nation, although not all. So here are the states that rejected the Medicaid expansion: Wyoming, South Dakota, Kansas, Texas, Wisconsin, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida. The amount of money that essentially flowed into those states from the federal government, it's tough to reject that as a state level official. Although to their credit, folks in Florida and Texas have, South Dakota as well, Tennessee, some of the fastest growing places in our country. So I guess the upshot is that if Medicaid made such a big difference in everybody's life and decision making, you would think that Texas and Florida, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, among them, those states wouldn't necessarily be the destination for so many people from the rest of the United States. So it's a interesting decision, worth discussing. 10 years since that particular Supreme Court decision. Of course, I get to throw in that it's my daughter's 10th birthday.
Yeah. And then Paul,
Yep.
just a real quick follow up on that. Yes, that was that Medicaid expansion was implemented with a Republican governor, but it just does point out that different states have different approaches to things, and if New Mexico, all things being equal, New Mexico's play that they love to run, if this were a football game, the play they would run the most is let's get more money from the feds, and that's that's been the case for a long time. And I'd say you could even go back to the Pete Domenici days when he was in Washington. Everything. Pete did a lot of good things. He helped at least pretend to try to balance the budget. I mean, he did more than pretend back when that was something they managed, but still bringing home the bacon from federal spending to New Mexico, that seems like if there's they talk about a fourth rail of government, that may be it in New Mexico.
Yeah, it's a issue that transcends partisanship in the state of New Mexico, and it's something that at the time we tried to convince Susana Martinez, but it was just impossible to get her on the side of rejecting. And I'm not criticizing her for that move. There is a lot of pressure that's brought to bear against all of these governors in all these states that have rejected Medicaid now 10 years on, not Medicaid expansion, I should say. Now, a week ago, and also on an interview with Alexis Martinez Johnson, I discussed that we had looked at Representative Teresa Leger Fernandez's website and found that on two of the most pressing issues of the day, energy and the economy, she hadn't posted anything since November of 2021. We put that out on social media. The state Republican Party picked it up. And let's just say that Representative Leger Fernandez has been very busy posting things going back several months. Perhaps it was the oversight of some intern or someone on staff, you can go to Representative Leger Fernandez's congressional page, fernandez.house.gov, and look at her issues, which she has a dozen or two listed that are important to her and her constituents. And by the way, Representative Leger Fernandez, if you are interested in coming on the podcast, we'd love to have you on to discuss some of those issues in more detail. But she does have quite a bit of information now posted up on her website. So good job there. I'm glad we were able to help her get things squared away. Another more housekeeping oriented issue. Had a column that ran across the state of New Mexico. I'm glad primary season is over and we're on to the big Megillah, the big kahuna this fall, the general election, where we're going to have a real conversation. Voters are going to be presented some very stark differences in terms of the vision of New Mexico between the candidates, but we also have issues like the pre-K state-funded through the land grant permanent fund. That is going to be on the ballot. Now, there are left-wing organizations out there actively promoting this already, but in order to get ahead of the curve, I figured why not get an opinion piece out there talking about the Tennessee story, which was relatively recent, and really highlighting the fact that pre-K is not necessarily the option needed right now. It's going to be a tough battle. I heard of some polling just this week that shows somewhere on the order of 60% support. It really is unfortunate because of the system in place. We have these permanent funds, which you only see the program created. There's very little in the way of what are we foregoing off of this fund. And it really, I think, denigrates the whole idea of these permanent funds, sets up some false and unfortunate decisions. There's a lot that New Mexicans could do with those dollars if they were returned to them in the form of tax cuts, and businesses could be grown if they weren't paying as many taxes to the state of New Mexico. But alas, they are all tied up in these permanent funds.
Yeah, Paul, we talked a little bit in between sessions that, yeah, New Mexico's permanent funds don't always encourage or enforce or reinforce effective policies. And I likened it to, kind of the children of trust fund babies and kids, that they are not always the most successful, the most diligent, and the most well-performing. Money itself doesn't always make things better. And the thing about this constitutional amendment is it's going to put amount of money on there. Again, not whether it's doing any good or not, or whether the program is successful or effective, but it's just there. So,
yeah, no metrics would come into play to determine, oh, this is a not particularly effective government program. We're going to send this money elsewhere. Unfortunately, as frustrating as the legislature can be, at least they have to discuss, debate, have some form of accountability for the government programs that are funded each and every year. This, once it's in the Constitution, Reagan's old line about nothing harder to kill than a government program. Well, there something,
a constitutionally mandated
Yes.
government program in New Mexico.
Exactly. You stole my line. Whose line is it anyway? That's okay.
Okay, that's all right.
All right. Well, speaking of gasoline and taxes from gasoline, but in a very different context, Joe Biden, president, has put forth some plan to suspend temporarily the 18.4 cent per gallon federal gas tax. And like Pavlov's dog, if you will, the Rio Grande Foundation will not kick this 18.4 cents temporary tax reduction to the curb. We will gladly accept it if President Biden can get it done. He has some problems in his own Democratic Party, starting with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Because they don't like to reduce taxes ever for some reason.
Yeah, and of all the federal taxes, unlike so many others that the federal government and state governments implement, the gas tax does do something that people actually benefit from in the form of road construction. It's not as effective as it could be. It should be dedicated to roads and road repairs. Unfortunately, it gets diverted to transit and other things. But the fact is that the federal government is also close to $30 trillion in debt. And, again, while we support reducing that particular burden, this federal government is just not doing a very good job with its finances. It would be a much more productive decision to fully ramp up federal oil and gas production on federal lands, specifically in New Mexico, producing even more money that could be wasted by New Mexico government and thrown into a permanent fund that unfortunately won't do much effectively with it. But that's not why we support that policy. We support that policy because, one, it gets to the heart of the matter, which is that with the Russian war in Ukraine, there are supply issues. There are longstanding supply issues with Eastern Europe and natural gas, and even Western Europe, that could be fundamentally addressed. And the federal government has this issue because of the environmental group dominance over the Democratic Party's policies, that it would be great to see a positive change of tone and policy coming from this administration, which has remained abjectly tone deaf to addressing the problems that actually need to be addressed, especially in the area of energy.
Yeah, and Paul, I realize most people consume this podcast audio only, but for those that don't, I will give you my signal. This is what it is. I think this reduction temporarily is one hand clapping.
Okay.
It's like this is it's like I'll call it ceremonial. Just like the reduction or the releases from the strategic oil reserve. Did it make a little impact for a little bit of time? Yes, it did. But and what is the federal gas tax?
18.3.
Okay, 18.3 cents for 3 months when we're $2 and $3 into a bad situation. I'm not sure that even politically it's going to be viewed very well, but we'll see what happens. So it's a little bit of I don't know. This is too little, too late, not enough, not the right tool for the job.
Yeah, and the biggest thing is that Pelosi is not on board, and if Pelosi were, or alternatively in an alternative universe,
or in a galaxy far, far away.
Well, it couldn't be that far away. It could be like January of next year, which would be January 2023, if the Republicans have control of both houses of Congress. Their tax cuts or reduction spidey sense is much stronger than Pelosi's. Would a Republican Congress be willing to give Biden something like this? I don't know. Very interesting question. I think it would be interesting to see, and we may see that situation unfold itself come next January. But for now, unless Nancy Pelosi has a change of heart, if she has a heart, we will be kind of in this similar situation unless Joe Biden can do something dramatic to convince her. So we shall see. And as I speak, the Guessing family is preparing for a road trip family vacation. It's going to be expensive, but of course, flying is expensive as well,
and increasingly unpredictable because a lot of flights canceled. I know I work with a lot of people that fly for business, and it's mighty rough out there in the quote unquote friendly skies.
Well, a lot of those pilots were given the heave ho because airplanes or airlines are federal contractors carrying mail in the such. Ergo, they had to obey with the Biden administration's vaccine mandate, and many of the pilots said, all right, well, I may be getting towards retirement anyway, or for whatever principled reason, they said, sorry, we're done here. And there's just not enough pilots in the system or available to come back and make the planes run on time, which I heard Mussolini, at least on the trains run on time thing,
exactly.
he had that down, supposedly. I don't know. There's a quote out there about that, though.
Well, and I had I had a mentor who once told me a tired executive is a dangerous executive. And this was in business. But Paul, a tired and burned out airline pilot, man, that's very frightening. So,
True. Yeah. And hopefully everybody who travels for the Independence Day holiday has safe travels. And that could include, for some, plans to come to Albuquerque, maybe even if you're feeling really frisky, downtown Albuquerque. And the mayor, Mayor Keller, unleashed his latest so called plan to get crime under control in downtown, which is by no means the only area where crime is running out of control in the Duke City. But Keller came out with this, and he has this one Albuquerque fund, which 15,000 of it came from PNM. It's got $90,000 in it, and Keller is somehow under the impression that for less than $100,000 that he can make an impact on crime. Now, in Albuquerque, in downtown Albuquerque. Now, set aside whether this is moral or ethical for him to be out beating the bushes for businesses to donate to this fund to pay for policing a second time.
yeah, basically having a police bake sale, if you will, organized by the mayor of Albuquerque. I don't know.
Yeah, until Vinny shows up at the business's front door and says, "Oh yeah, you're going to pay for this, or we're
Yeah.
going to do something, negative towards your business." And that's the comparison that was put forth. I believe Pete Dinelli, numerous other kind of commentators, including even an editorial in the Albuquerque Journal, rightly criticized this highly questionable approach to business. Now, at least if the city budget were somehow very constrained, if we were living through, the economic downturn of 2008, 2009, where maybe we'd experienced a big decline in the city's budget, we could have a viable conversation about this. But we just went through a 20% budget increase at the city that was bigger than what Mayor Keller asked for. And in the meantime, the city is putting $3 million into free buses, which it dwarfs the 90,000 that PNM has put in so far, or 90,000 that's in this one Albuquerque fund. Only 15,000 came from PNM, but 250,000 also going into Planned Parenthood. It is just mind blowing that this mayor thinks it's plausible for him to go out asking businesses to pay again for downtown policing when it's clearly not a priority for his administration.
Yeah, and Paul, I just feel for the downtown businesses, those that have managed to be still be in business over the past 2, 3, 4 years. A lot of them have left, and then it's inevitable every few years. It's like, oh, we want businesses to move to downtown Albuquerque. Well, when they get ready, once a lot of more businesses leave, if they keep on with policies like this, what's your rationale going to be why you should do that? Come here where police coverage you'll have to pay for yourself, and it's bad anyway, and crime is rampant, and what is the message exactly that would encourage a business to open up there? It's just I don't know. This is an odd one. So.
Yeah, it's a very strange. Yeah. We often call into question the politics policy implications of policies we disagree with. But in this case, it is both a dubiously political policy as well as the the policy implications. The way he's approaching it just don't seem to make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and then Paul, the city of Albuquerque is always right there as making the businesses somehow to be the perpetrators of this crime issue as opposed to the victims of this crime issue. And just yet another example. There's a lot of businesses out there, and I talk to their owners who don't like to report things to the city of Albuquerque because your business could be listed as a nuisance, and because of how the city's police department, APD, operates, they're not getting a lot of assistance anyway. So just this is seems like one that maybe pull that one back away, work on getting downtown and the rest of Albuquerque crime situation under control. This just seems like one that I don't know. You hesitate to say one of the worst ideas you've ever heard because that gets put out there as a challenge. But this is not a good
I thought
policy.
that was ART, but okay. Well,
Okay, yeah, you pick your program.
yeah. All right. Well, we in New Mexico are one of a relatively small and dwindling number of states that are still in a COVID emergency situation. Our governor has, really been at the forefront of aggressively attacking COVID and failing miserably while she's done it, as with so many other policies. But according to the National Academy for State Health Policy, New Mexico is one of 15 states still in an emergency. In this case, the average person doesn't see it out on the streets. You don't have a lot of reason to think that we're in an emergency. And this is presumably the case in many other states. But I want to run through the list because it's an interesting group. Alaska, which is a pretty red state. I believe their governor's a Democrat, though. Washington and California, two very dyed-in-the-wool blue states. Colorado, who, while Polis is a Democrat, he's certainly been more moderate than Michelle Lujan Grisham when it came to COVID. New Mexico, Kansas, another Democrat governor, I believe. Now, this one's surprising. Texas, still in emergency. Now, I think Texas may have something to do with the border, and because there are various reasons that the federal immigration situation has not been changed dramatically, and it has to do with a policy that's related to COVID. Illinois, of course, blue. New York, blue. Connecticut, Rhode Island, also blue states. But we have other states, including West Virginia, very red state. North Carolina, I think their governor is a Democrat still. Georgia, a red state. Delaware, another blue state. So it's kind of a hodgepodge, a smattering, if you will, of states that are in an emergency. But New Mexico, as I believe we have stated both on this show, New Mexico is one of the states that's going to be out of my cold, dead hands. That's Michelle Lujan Grisham. Or at least when she leaves office, that is when she'll be willing to forego her emergency powers on COVID.
Yeah, and Paul, I lose track. There's not a lot of things that are happening because of I see anymore. So I quit reading those. I quit reading those orders 2 or 3 months ago. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything in there that's of real substance? You need to wear a mask at some place that. I'm just not sure what's going on with that.
I've seen reports that places like some of the schools, like summer schools right now at this point, of course, I understood that there was a Los Alamos school district, maybe. This is not substantiated by any journalism. This is reports from people up in Los Alamos. And of course, at this point, most of the schools are not in. National labs and other installations. I will say that I was traveling north to Santa Fe on Friday of last week, and there was a crash, apparently, not widely reported in the news, but the interstate was shut down. I-25 was shut down. I got off to try to go around it, as you often do. Yeah. My app said, go onto this road, that road. And I wound up at a checkpoint of the San Felipe Pueblo, and I believe that was COVID related, and I could not get through at all to Santa Fe. The access point to Santa Fe, if I wanted to, and my timeliness was not going to allow this, to come back through Albuquerque, go all the way around into the East Mountains, and come up the other side. This we're talking about was a blockage on I-25 that lasted between 5 and 6 hours. This was a lengthy ordeal. So I just had to forego my plans to be in Santa Fe at that time and wait for the blockage to clear and go up the interstate. So there are, I think, things, and who knows, San Felipe Pueblo may not have to adhere to whatever the governor's doing on COVID, there could be other implications.
Yeah, they
But
may have their own. I mean, they have a sovereign government set up, so they can do what they want. I would imagine.
exactly. Well, we will be back at it next week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or have your Google Home play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.